Let's stick with the currency theme and talk about what is happening with another currency, and that is the South African rand. It's up strongly over the last month, driven by the carry trade, yet the country is in the grips of an economic crisis caused by COVID-19 and, of course, years of economic mismanagement. Colin Coleman, Senior Fellow at Yale and former Goldman Sachs CEO for Sub-Saharan Africa, joining us now. Colin's got a 10-point plan for South Africa's economy, which includes a basic income grant and, to pay for it, tax reforms. He joins us now. Colin, walk us through your plan, because South Africa is in the grips of a significant crisis and many people are really struggling to see how it gets out of it.
Thank you, Guy. There is a dual crisis in South Africa, effectively drawn from the contraction as a result of COVID, estimated by the National Treasury at 7.2% for 2020. But overall, a huge loss of jobs estimated to bring the unemployment rate at the end of this year, on an expanded definition, including for those given up looking for work, to as much as 50% unemployment. And so in that context, these are emergency times. I propose that the government consider introducing a basic income grant at a cost of around about $8.5 billion per annum, which would effectively cover the unemployed workers, provide a stimulus as they use that money for essential items, food and household goods and others, and at the same time help drive in other elements of this 10-point plan important drivers of growth, starting with the power utility Eskom, which I proposed should be recapitalized in the form of removing government guaranteed debt from Eskom onto the government balance sheet, and take advantage of the benefit of the improved spread between the government and Eskom itself, which will save the government money, but also release Eskom to focus on its core business of providing secure and safe energy supply. And various other ways in which I believe competition can be introduced more effectively into the South African economy, including looking at special export zones and industrial incentives to drive investment. As we come out of COVID, I think a lot of opportunity is going to arise to position regions as alternative suppliers of supply chains into regions away from China in particular. And I think South Africa can do that, given it's got a sophisticated financial infrastructure and manufacturing infrastructure in South Africa.
Colin, what you're talking about is entry-level jobs. What you're talking about is replicating what China has done. I've heard this argument about South Africa before, and the government has always pushed the idea of trying to create more value-added jobs, and I've certainly heard this from Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, on a number of occasions. What makes you think that the government is now prepared to pivot to do this? What you're talking about is a significant shake-up, both structurally and fiscally, in South Africa. And I haven't seen much evidence that the government is capable of delivering that.
Yeah, the question of capacity of the state is an ongoing problem. It's the bizarre situation in South Africa that you have amongst emerging markets, in my view, amongst the strongest cadre of management expertise in emerging markets around the world, side by side with a state that is, by all means, post the Zuma state capture years, incapacitated and weak. So I think there needs to be an honest conversation between the government and the business community about how to deploy management skills into the state and how to more smartly have the state collaborate with the private sector. And this touches on some of the issues I talked about in this lecture of some ideological battles and the stale old debates we've had. And it's time really to get rid of those and to move forward. So I'm hoping that the provocative lecture I gave does shake the tree a little bit and get the attention of the authorities and perhaps contribute towards loosening up this debate towards a more constructive outcome.
Politically, what is it like there? I mean, different parties working together. How is the business community lined up or not with the government? I mean, they may listen to you, but how willing or able are they to talk to each other?
Yeah, well, they are. I mean, South Africa is a country of huge amounts of engagement and talks that dates back to the constitutional negotiations, and it's a kind of culture of talking, not so much a culture of doing. So there is an engagement, but fundamentally, the governing party, the African National Congress, headed by the President Ramaphosa, who's the man of the moment in South Africa, has an overwhelming majority in South Africa, and they can do what effectively they decide they want to do. They do consult, for example, around the COVID pandemic reforms, which they did quite effectively with the opposition parties. That's become more difficult of late. But in terms of economic reforms, really it's the Parliament of Views within the African National Congress that is going to determine the government's ability to implement reforms. And here leadership is everything. So it's really up to the President Ramaphosa, to lean in and say, this is the direction we're taking. These are the people I want to lead my administration. And if you're not on the ship, I'm going to get you off because this boat is moving in a certain direction. So I think he needs to be more decisive and take the country forward. But obviously he's got his own political judgments on the balance of forces in his government and in his party to take into account. But I think he is he's probably strongest post-COVID pandemic than he was pre it. And so I would encourage and be hopeful that he will lean in and undertake these reforms that he is promising.
Colin, you talk about the business community leading in. The business community has lent in when it comes to Eskom, and it's proved to be incredibly hard to deliver some meaningful reform there. South Africa cannot progress without Eskom. South Africa cannot generate the kind of special zones and compete with China without Eskom, without power. You talk about your plan, but I'm really struggling to understand how progress can be made from here without really strong leadership. And we've seen a whole series of people come through that business, Jabu Mabuza, all kinds of well-known businessmen. Why is it not working?
Well, the current CEO, Andre de Ruyter, is doing a fantastic job. I think the markets are aware of that and are encouraged by the moves that he's made. But in terms of the operations of Eskom and the load shedding and those type of issues have improved. They're still ongoing, but they're not as crippling as they were to the economy. But I think the major noose around the neck of Eskom and the government is the debt pile, which is 450 billion over a 30 billion EBITDA, or 15 times net debt to EBITDA. So it's effectively a business out of business. So until that is resolved, they are not a going concern. And so one has to bite the bullet, as I've suggested in this 10-point plan, and take this debt, the 300 billion rand of government guaranteed debt, out of Eskom. So I think that this is now having the South African Airways issue on the path to resolution, the next matter that the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, has to grab hold of and together with his colleague, the Minister of Finance, sort out once and for all.